Some destinies are so terrifying that entire kingdoms would rather destroy an innocent girl than let her discover who she truly is. Claire Foster had never imagined that her quiet little village rested at the edge of history itself. She was simply a kind young woman with pale skin, gentle blue eyes, and a habit of helping anyone who crossed her path, whether it was an injured traveler, a frightened child, or a stray wolf wandering too close to the farms. Every morning she walked the same narrow trail into the forest, gathering herbs that the village healer traded for bread and candles. Her life was predictable, peaceful, and almost invisible, exactly the way she preferred it. The old people often whispered about forgotten legends whenever the moon appeared unusually bright, but Claire always smiled politely before returning to her work. Legends belonged to kings, warriors, and ancient heroes. They could never belong to someone like her. Yet the world had been quietly waiting for her since long before she was born. On the evening of the autumn equinox, an unnatural silence settled across the valley. The birds disappeared into the trees. Even the river seemed to flow more slowly, as though nature itself were listening for something hidden beyond human hearing. Claire stood alone near the forest clearing after rescuing a frightened lamb that had wandered away from its flock. As she looked toward the eastern sky, the full moon began changing before her eyes. Its silver glow slowly deepened into crimson until the heavens seemed painted with living scarlet light. She instinctively lifted one trembling hand, unable to explain the strange warmth spreading through her fingertips. The instant her fingers reached toward the moon, crimson waves rolled across the clouds in every direction. The entire sky responded as though it recognized her. Hundreds of miles away, ancient towers shook with dormant magic. Sacred bells that had remained silent for centuries rang without human hands touching them. Royal astronomers abandoned their charts in stunned disbelief. High priests opened sealed vaults beneath forgotten temples. One sentence echoed through every kingdom before sunrise. The blood moon had awakened. Hidden inside the oldest royal archives lay a prophecy so ancient that most rulers believed it had become nothing more than a myth. It warned that one day a young woman would inherit the will of the blood moon itself, possessing the power to reshape the balance between every kingdom. Some believed she would become the world's greatest protector. Others feared she would end every throne ever built. Fear spread much faster than hope. Before dawn, royal messengers galloped across mountains, forests, and frozen plains carrying identical orders stamped with golden seals. Find the girl connected to the blood moon. Spare no effort. Every kingdom offered unimaginable rewards to whoever discovered her identity first. None of them knew her name. None of them knew that while kings prepared armies and advisors argued over ancient prophecies, Claire Foster was quietly returning home with the rescued lamb in her arms, wondering only why the moon had seemed so beautiful that night. Far beyond the northern mountains, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood silently watched the fading crimson sky from the balcony of his stone fortress. Unlike the other rulers, he did not summon hunters or prepare soldiers. Instead, he unfolded a weathered parchment that had been passed from one Alpha King to the next for generations. After reading the final line, he slowly closed his eyes and whispered into the cold night air, "If they hunt her because they fear the blood moon, then they have already misunderstood the prophecy." Claire Foster barely slept after the strange shimmer appeared in the creek. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw crimson light spreading across the water before disappearing as though nothing had happened. Dawn usually brought comfort to the valley, but this morning even the sunrise felt uneasy. Thin clouds drifted across the mountains, and the familiar songs of birds were replaced by an unsettling silence that made every sound seem louder than it should have been. Hoping to clear her thoughts, Claire followed the same woodland path she had walked since childhood, gathering fresh herbs while reminding herself that fear often made ordinary things appear extraordinary. Yet the forest no longer felt ordinary. Deer watched her from a distance without running away. Wolves stood quietly between the trees before vanishing without leaving a single footprint behind. Even the breeze carried a faint scent she had never noticed before, fresh rain mixed with wildflowers blooming far too late in the season. When Claire returned to the village, she found strangers standing near the market square. They wore different colors and carried symbols from kingdoms scattered across the continent. Some introduced themselves as merchants. Others claimed to be scholars searching for forgotten legends. Their smiles seemed polite, but their eyes carefully studied every young woman they passed. Claire lowered her gaze and continued walking, unaware that one elderly traveler paused for several seconds after seeing her before quietly whispering to himself. The eyes matched the oldest description. Across the valley, another group of riders arrived carrying fresh royal notices. The village elder reluctantly nailed the parchment to the wooden message board where everyone gathered to read important announcements. The reward had doubled overnight. Every kingdom now promised unimaginable wealth, noble titles, and protected lands to anyone who revealed information leading to the mysterious young woman connected to the celestial omen. Fear spread through the villagers more quickly than excitement. Friends began questioning one another. Families became suspicious of harmless coincidences. Claire noticed conversations ending the moment she approached. Although no one accused her directly, she could feel invisible walls forming around her with every passing hour. Meanwhile, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood crossed the northern pass accompanied only by his oldest advisor, Gabriel Ashcroft, a man whose loyalty had been proven through decades of service. Gabriel finally broke the long silence between them. "Your Majesty, every ruler believes this girl will become the greatest threat in history." Ethan kept his eyes on the winding road ahead before answering calmly. "No. They believe she will become a threat because they have forgotten the difference between power and purpose." He reached inside his traveling cloak and unfolded the ancient parchment once more. The faded words remained unchanged, but one sentence continued echoing in his thoughts. "The chosen guardian shall awaken only when the kingdoms choose fear instead of truth." Ethan quietly folded the parchment again, realizing the prophecy had already begun unfolding exactly as it had warned centuries ago. Back in the village, evening approached with surprising speed. Claire stepped outside carrying a lantern to gather fresh water before darkness settled over the valley. As she reached the old stone well, the lantern flame suddenly brightened without any wind touching it. At the same instant, every wolf hidden within the surrounding forest lifted its head toward the darkening sky and released a single haunting call that echoed across the mountains. Claire stood frozen, her heartbeat quickening as the crimson reflection slowly appeared once again across the still surface of the water, and for the first time she realized the mysterious force was no longer simply following her. It was waiting for her to answer. Claire Foster stood motionless beneath the ancient stone arch as the crimson symbols slowly pulsed beneath her fingertips. The whisper she had heard only moments before had disappeared, yet the strange feeling of being welcomed remained. It was not the fear she had expected. Instead, it felt like returning to a place she had somehow forgotten despite never seeing it before. The tiny silver lights drifted deeper into the forest, inviting her forward without a single spoken word. She hesitated only briefly before following them through a narrow passage hidden behind thick vines. Beyond it lay a forgotten sanctuary untouched by time. Broken pillars surrounded a circular stone platform where moonlight poured through the open canopy above. Wildflowers covered the ancient floor, blooming in colors no season should have allowed. Everything felt peaceful, as though the forest itself had protected this place for centuries. As Claire stepped onto the weathered stone, the air grew warmer. Delicate crimson patterns spread outward beneath her feet like reflections dancing across still water. She instinctively stepped back, but the glowing lines faded without causing harm. Then she noticed something carved into the center of the platform. It was not a name. It was the symbol of a full moon embraced by two wolves facing opposite directions. Although she had never seen the design before, it somehow felt familiar. Before she could examine it more closely, the silver lights suddenly vanished, leaving the sanctuary silent once again. At that very moment, far beyond the forest, another royal delegation entered the village. They carried official banners from kingdoms Claire had only heard about in childhood stories. Their arrival drew nearly every villager into the square. The commander politely addressed the crowd, explaining that the search had become a matter of international importance. He promised generous protection for anyone willing to provide information. His words sounded calm, yet everyone sensed the urgency beneath them. The village elder assured the visitors that no unusual stranger had appeared in recent weeks, but uncertainty lingered behind every answer. Suspicion had already begun changing neighbors into silent observers. Meanwhile, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood reached the northern border of the valley before sunset. His horse slowed naturally as if sensing the unusual energy flowing through the surrounding forest. Gabriel Ashcroft studied fresh reports delivered by trusted scouts. More hunting parties had entered the region from the east and south, each believing they were closer than anyone else to discovering the mysterious young woman. Ethan listened quietly before folding the reports away. He understood that every additional search party increased the chance that fear would reach her before compassion ever could. As darkness settled across the valley, Claire finally left the hidden sanctuary carrying more questions than answers. She had taken only a few steps before hearing distant voices moving through the trees. Instinct urged her to hide behind a large oak as several unfamiliar riders passed along the trail carrying lanterns marked with royal insignias. They paused only yards away. One rider unfolded an old parchment containing a faded sketch that was too worn to recognize clearly. Another quietly said, "The prophecy claims she does not know who she is yet. That is our only advantage." Claire held her breath until the voices disappeared into the distance. Her heart pounded as she realized the search was no longer happening somewhere beyond the mountains. It had reached the very forest where she had spent her entire life. Above the treetops, hidden behind drifting clouds, the moon slowly emerged once more, and for the briefest moment its pale silver edge shimmered with the faintest trace of crimson, as though it had silently acknowledged that the distance between destiny and discovery had become dangerously small. Claire Foster carefully wrapped the shimmering white feather inside a small linen cloth before leaving the hidden sanctuary. She did not know why she felt compelled to protect it, only that abandoning it somehow felt impossible. The forest seemed unusually quiet as she made her way home, yet the silence no longer carried peace. It carried expectation. Every rustling leaf made her glance over her shoulder. Every distant howl reminded her that unseen eyes were following the same path she walked. When she finally reached the edge of the village, she noticed something that had never happened before. Children who usually greeted her with cheerful smiles were being called back inside by anxious parents. Windows closed as she passed. Conversations stopped the moment she appeared. Fear was no longer traveling toward the village. It had already settled inside it. Claire quietly delivered the herbs to the village healer, who accepted them with trembling hands before gently placing both hands over Claire's shoulders. The elderly woman looked into her eyes for several long seconds, as though struggling with a difficult decision. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely louder than a whisper. "If strangers begin asking about you, promise me you will not answer every question." Claire looked confused. Why would anyone ask about me? The healer forced a faint smile that could not hide her concern. Because people searching for miracles often mistake kindness for weakness, and people searching for power rarely understand either. Before Claire could ask another question, loud hoofbeats echoed through the village square. Another royal delegation had arrived, this time accompanied by respected scholars carrying heavy wooden chests filled with ancient books and star charts. They announced that every village would be inspected for unusual celestial signs and forgotten relics connected to the ancient prophecy. Although their words sounded formal and respectful, their growing presence tightened the invisible net surrounding the valley. Miles away, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood finally reached the outer forest where the crimson light had appeared the previous morning. Gabriel Ashcroft carefully studied the surrounding landscape before speaking quietly. "The other kingdoms believe she is hiding because she fears them." Ethan slowly shook his head. "No, she is hiding because she does not yet know why they are searching." He dismounted and walked toward a narrow trail where fresh footprints remained visible in the soft earth. They were small, careful, and unmistakably recent. Beside them lay delicate wildflowers that should have withered days earlier, but instead bloomed with remarkable freshness. Ethan knelt and gently touched one blossom before closing his eyes. The ancient parchment had described the sign as well. Wherever the true guardian walked, life quietly answered her presence. He rose without another word, choosing not to follow the trail immediately. Instead, he turned away from it, understanding that rushing toward destiny often frightened it away. As evening settled across the valley, Claire returned once more to the forgotten sanctuary, unable to resist the quiet pull she now felt every time darkness approached. The moment she stepped onto the ancient stone platform, the white feather floated gently from her hands without any visible force. It drifted toward the center of the circle where the crimson symbols awakened brighter than ever before. A beam of pale moonlight descended through the trees, illuminating the ancient carving of two wolves beneath the full moon. Then another figure slowly emerged from the shadows beyond the sanctuary entrance. He wore a dark traveling cloak instead of royal armor, and although Claire had never seen him before, the calm certainty in his eyes made her instinctively realize that this stranger had not come to capture her. He had come because he already knew exactly who she was. Claire Foster remained silent long after the glowing words faded from the ancient stone. The sanctuary returned to its peaceful stillness, yet nothing inside her felt the same. Every answer Ethan Blackwood had given seemed to uncover two new mysteries waiting beneath it. She looked toward the weathered carvings stretching around the circular chamber and realized that someone had preserved this place with extraordinary care for centuries. Moss covered the walls, vines embraced the pillars, and wildflowers softened every broken stone, yet not a single carving had truly disappeared. It was as though time itself had refused to erase the truth hidden here. Ethan slowly walked toward another section of the sanctuary, where an enormous stone tablet rested against the far wall. Unlike the other carvings, this one had been concealed behind layers of ivy. He carefully brushed the vines aside until an intricate map emerged beneath the moonlight. It showed every known kingdom connected by silver lines leading toward a single symbol at the center. Claire recognized the symbol immediately. It was the same moon embraced by two wolves that had appeared beneath her feet when she first entered the sanctuary. This was never built for one kingdom, Ethan explained quietly. It belongs to all of them. That is why every ruler fears losing control of what it represents. Claire studied the ancient map, noticing tiny marks surrounding the central symbol. These look like people, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Guardians. Every generation chose one through trust, never through force. But that tradition ended long ago when powerful rulers decided they could shape destiny for themselves. Claire lowered her eyes as the weight of those words settled over her. Then why would this place choose someone like me? She asked softly. Ethan answered without hesitation. Perhaps because you never asked for power. Before Claire could respond, the sanctuary trembled almost imperceptibly. It was not an earthquake or a storm. It felt more like a deep breath passing through the ancient stones. The moonlight shining through the open ceiling suddenly grew brighter, illuminating another hidden inscription near the center of the platform. Both of them stepped closer. The newly revealed words described a forgotten covenant between the Blood Moon and the First Guardians. The covenant did not promise strength, victory, or authority. Instead, it spoke of compassion, humility, and the courage to protect even those who misunderstood the truth. Claire slowly realized that the prophecy had never been about ruling kingdoms. It had always been about preserving balance between them. Outside the sanctuary, unnoticed by either of them, several distant figures observed the surrounding forest from a nearby ridge. They had not discovered the hidden entrance, but they had seen the unusual glow rising above the trees. Messengers quietly departed in different directions, carrying news that the mysterious phenomenon had appeared once again. Within hours, more search parties would move toward the valley. Ethan sensed the urgency even before receiving any report. He looked toward the sanctuary entrance, then back at Claire. "We cannot remain here much longer," he said gently. "The others are getting closer." Claire took one final look around the peaceful sanctuary that already felt strangely familiar. For the first time since the crimson moon had appeared, She understood that her ordinary life could never truly return. Yet instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt something unexpected growing quietly within her. It was not confidence. It was purpose. As they turned to leave, the ancient carvings shimmered once more beneath the moonlight, and a single silver beam stretched across the stone floor toward a distant mountain hidden beyond the forest, silently revealing the next place the forgotten path wished them to follow. The white wolf turned without making a sound and began walking toward the distant mountains, never once looking back, as though it already knew Claire Foster and Ethan Blackwood would follow. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh rain through the valley, while the first rays of sunlight painted the forest in soft gold. Claire glanced toward the crowded plains below, where countless royal camps continued to spread across the land like a growing tide. The peaceful home she had always known was slowly disappearing beneath the weight of a prophecy she had never asked to inherit. Even so, every step she took beside Ethan felt steadier than the last. The uncertainty remained, but it no longer walked alone. As they entered the higher trails, the forest gradually changed. Ancient trees rose taller than any Claire had ever seen, their broad branches weaving together until sunlight filtered through in gentle streams. Strange white flowers bloomed along the narrow path despite the rocky ground, and birds that normally fled from travelers remained calmly perched nearby. Gabriel Ashcroft quietly observed everything around them before speaking. "This forest remembers the guardians." Claire looked around with quiet wonder. "How can a forest remember?" Gabriel smiled faintly. "Some places protect history without needing words." Ethan remained thoughtful as they continued climbing. He had studied countless royal records throughout his life, yet none had ever described this hidden route. The old kings had deliberately erased every map leading here, believing forgotten places could no longer influence the future. They had underestimated the patience of time. Several hours later, the white wolf stopped before a wide stone bridge suspended above a crystal river flowing through the mountain pass. The bridge appeared abandoned, yet every stone remained perfectly preserved despite its age. At the center stood two weathered statues of wolves facing one another with lowered heads instead of raised claws. Claire instinctively stepped closer, feeling the same quiet warmth she had experienced inside the sanctuary. The moment her hand rested upon the smooth stone railing, delicate silver light spread across the ancient bridge, revealing carvings that had been invisible only seconds before. Ethan carefully examined the newly awakened symbols. They did not speak of battles or victories. Instead, they honored guardians who had chosen mercy when fear demanded judgment. Claire slowly traced one inscription with her fingertips, and another gentle vision touched her thoughts. She saw ordinary families from different kingdoms sharing harvest festivals together beneath a bright full moon, long before borders had divided them. Children laughed together without knowing which kingdom they belonged to because peace had once mattered more than power. The vision faded, leaving behind a quiet sadness mixed with hope. "The prophecy was never created to separate people," Claire whispered. "It was meant to remind them they already belonged to one another." Ethan looked at her with quiet admiration because she had understood in moments what generations of rulers had failed to see. Before either of them could speak again, a silver hawk circled high above the bridge before descending toward Gabriel. A small message tube rested securely against its leg. Gabriel carefully unfolded the parchment, and his expression grew solemn. Scouts had confirmed that the Alliance of Kingdoms had officially declared Ethan a traitor for refusing to surrender the Guardian if she was found. His royal seal had been removed from the council records, and messengers were already carrying the announcement across every kingdom. Gabriel silently handed the message to Ethan. He read it only once before folding it away without hesitation. Claire watched him carefully. "You knew this could happen." Ethan met her eyes with calm certainty. "Yes." "Do you regret your choice?" she asked softly. A gentle smile appeared across his face. "Not for a single moment." As the wind swept across the mountain pass, the white wolf raised its head toward the distant peaks, and somewhere beyond the clouds a faint crimson glow shimmered across the highest summit, quietly revealing that the greatest secret of the blood moon still waited ahead of them. The blood moon climbed above the highest mountain in complete silence, covering the ancient plateau with a soft crimson glow that transformed every silver leaf into a living ember. Claire Foster stood beneath the towering tree with the single crimson leaf resting gently in her hands, feeling its warmth spread through her palms and into her heartbeat. Nothing around her felt frightening. The ancient power surrounding the mountain carried no anger, only an overwhelming sense of belonging, as though generations of forgotten guardians had quietly welcomed her home. Ethan Blackwood remained a few steps away, watching both the rising moon and the narrow mountain trails below. Tiny points of light flickered across the distant slopes as hundreds of lanterns slowly climbed toward the summit. The Allied kingdoms were approaching from every direction. Gabriel Ashcroft studied the movement carefully before lowering the spyglass in his hands. "They have surrounded every lower pass," he said calmly. "They believe there is no path left for us." Ethan never looked away from the approaching lights. "They are searching for someone to capture. They still do not understand they are walking toward a place they cannot command." Claire quietly stepped beside him. "If they reach this mountain, I do not want anyone harmed because of me." Ethan turned toward her with the same steady expression that had never changed since they first met inside the Forgotten Sanctuary. "That is exactly why you were chosen. Power seeks to protect itself. Compassion seeks to protect everyone." His words settled gently into Claire's heart, reminding her of every vision the ancient covenant had shown her. The Guardian had never been created to stand above kingdoms. She existed to remind them of the promises they had abandoned. As the crimson light grew brighter, the enormous silver tree released dozens of glowing leaves that drifted peacefully across the clearing before forming a slow circle around Claire. Each leaf reflected another forgotten memory. She saw children from rival kingdoms laughing together beneath harvest festivals, elders exchanging stories without borders separating them, and kings placing their hands over their hearts instead of their swords when they gathered beneath the blood moon. Then one final memory appeared unlike the others. The very first guardian stood beneath this same tree while the earliest Alpha King knelt before her, not as a servant, but as an equal protector. Together they vowed that neither crown nor prophecy would ever control the other, because balance could survive only through free choice. The vision faded, leaving Claire with a quiet certainty she had never felt before. She finally understood why the ancient message had insisted that no one could choose her path except herself. At that very moment, the first delegation from the Allied kingdoms emerged onto the edge of the plateau. Their commanders immediately stopped upon seeing the glowing tree and the crimson moon suspended above it. No one spoke. The peaceful light surrounding Claire made every prepared command suddenly feel meaningless. Ethan calmly stepped forward until he stood between the gathered rulers and Claire. He drew no weapon. He raised no voice. Instead, he removed the royal crest from his traveling cloak and placed it gently upon the ancient stone at the foot of the silver tree. "I stand here today," he declared with quiet conviction, not as a king defending a throne, but as a guardian defending the freedom of one innocent woman to choose her own destiny. A deep silence spread across the mountain as the crimson moon brightened overhead. Then the ancient tree responded. Every glowing leaf lifted into the night sky at once, creating a brilliant river of crimson and silver that stretched across the heavens, revealing before every watching kingdom that the true power of the blood moon had never belonged to rulers, armies, or crowns. It had always awakened only in the presence of courage freely given and compassion freely chosen. The crowns rested silently upon the ancient stone as though centuries of pride had finally surrendered to a truth older than every kingdom surrounding the mountain. Claire Foster remained beneath the silver tree while the gentle light flowing through its branches spread across the plateau like the first light of dawn. No voice commanded the rulers to kneel. No unseen force demanded obedience. Instead, each person stood quietly with the unmistakable feeling that history itself had paused, waiting for a single choice to shape everything that would follow. Ethan Blackwood watched the gathered rulers with calm determination. He recognized many faces that had once debated alliances, borders, and power across polished council tables. Tonight none of those titles seemed important. The ancient covenant had stripped away every illusion until only character remained. The elderly queen who had first removed her crown stepped closer to the weathered altar and looked toward Claire with sincere respect. "We believed the Guardian would decide the future for us," she admitted softly. "Now we understand the future has always depended upon the choices we make ourselves." Her quiet confession encouraged others to speak honestly for the first time in generations. A northern king acknowledged that fear had shaped his kingdom's laws for longer than anyone could remember. A Western ruler admitted that royal scholars had rewritten portions of the prophecy to justify greater control over neighboring lands. Each admission carried no accusation toward others, only responsibility for what had been lost. Claire listened carefully, surprised that the gathering no longer resembled a council of competing kingdoms. It felt more like families rediscovering one another after years apart. As the conversations faded, the blood moon reflected gently across the silver bark of the ancient tree. Delicate streams of crimson light flowed through its roots before spreading across the circular stone beneath everyone's feet. Hidden carvings continued appearing one after another, revealing names of guardians long forgotten by history. Beside every guardian stood the name of an alpha king who had chosen protection over authority. Claire slowly realized the covenant had never belonged to one extraordinary individual. It had always depended upon ordinary people making extraordinary choices together. Ethan stepped quietly beside her and studied the newly revealed carvings. One final inscription slowly emerged near the center of the stone. Gabriel Ashcroft carefully brushed away loose dust until every word became clear beneath the moonlight. The ancient message declared that the Guardian could preserve balance only while standing beside leaders who willingly placed truth above ambition. Claire looked toward Ethan with quiet understanding. Their meeting had never been an accident. Long before either of them had been born, the Covenant had anticipated that compassion would require both a guardian willing to serve and a king willing to surrender his own advantage. A gentle breeze swept across the mountain, carrying silver leaves into the night sky where they drifted above every gathered ruler before dissolving into countless points of light. Each glowing spark settled over distant valleys, forests, villages, and castles far below, as though the mountain itself was sending hope back to every corner of the kingdoms. The commanders who had climbed the mountain expecting orders instead quietly lowered their banners. Messengers folded away declarations prepared for conflict because no battle remained to announce. Even the white wolf that had guided Claire through the mountains slowly walked toward the edge of the plateau before lifting its head beneath the glowing moon. One by one, answering howls echoed from distant forests across the kingdoms, not as a warning, but as a promise remembered. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them again, she no longer saw strangers divided by crowns. She saw people ready to carry an ancient promise home together, while above them the blood moon slowly softened into a peaceful silver glow, quietly confirming that the covenant had been restored not through power, but through the courage to choose trust once again. The first light of dawn spread gently across the ancient mountain, turning the silver leaves of the sacred tree into thousands of tiny mirrors that reflected a peaceful new beginning. Claire Foster stood quietly beneath its broad branches, watching the gathered rulers prepare for the journey home. Only a few nights earlier, they had climbed the mountain united by fear, determined to find and control the mysterious guardian foretold by the blood moon. Now they departed carrying something entirely different. They carried truth, freely accepted instead of forced upon them. Around the weathered altar, the crowns remained resting upon the ancient stone, untouched since the previous evening. One after another, each ruler approached the altar with quiet humility. Before reclaiming a crown, every king and queen placed a hand upon the old stone as a promise that the covenant would never again be hidden behind ambition or rewritten to serve power. Ethan Blackwood stood nearby with Gabriel Ashcroft, observing the silent ceremony with calm satisfaction. Gabriel smiled gently as the final ruler stepped away from the altar. "History changed here," he said quietly. Ethan slowly shook his head. "No. History remembered what it had almost forgotten." Claire turned toward the peaceful valley stretching beyond the mountain. The camps that had once surrounded the forests were already disappearing as banners were lowered and travelers began returning to their distant homes. The fear that had spread across every kingdom like a dark shadow had finally released its hold. In its place came something far stronger. Hope did not arrive with loud celebration. It arrived through thousands of quiet decisions made by ordinary people choosing trust instead of suspicion. As the morning breeze drifted through the clearing, the ancient silver tree released a final shower of glowing leaves. Instead of floating upward, they settled gently across the mountain path, where each leaf dissolved into clusters of delicate white flowers. Their sweet fragrance filled the air, and even the white wolf that had guided Claire throughout her journey quietly lay beneath the tree, resting with peaceful eyes as though its sacred task had finally been completed. Claire walked toward the ancient sanctuary stone one last time. The carvings that had once glowed with crimson light now shimmered softly in silver, their purpose fulfilled. As she placed her hand upon the weathered surface, the calm feminine voice she had first heard inside the forgotten sanctuary returned one final time. The Guardian does not end the story. She begins the next one. Claire smiled gently, understanding at last that the Covenant had never depended upon miracles. It depended upon every generation choosing compassion before fear. Ethan quietly joined her beneath the silver tree. There were no grand declarations left to make and no prophecy left to fulfill. Everything that truly mattered had already been chosen through courage, kindness, and sacrifice. Together they looked across the peaceful kingdoms below, where rivers reflected the morning sun and villages slowly awakened to a future no longer overshadowed by fear. Seasons passed, and stories of the mountains spread across every kingdom. Travelers spoke of a place where kings had laid aside their pride, where an ordinary young woman had reminded rulers of promises older than their thrones, and where an honorable alpha king had protected freedom instead of power. Children grew up hearing those stories beside warm fireplaces, not as legends meant to inspire fear, but as gentle reminders that the strongest hearts were always the kindest ones. Deep within the ancient forest, the forgotten sanctuary remained hidden beneath towering trees, patiently waiting for those who sought wisdom instead of control. And whenever the blood moon quietly returned to the night sky, people no longer looked upward with fear. They smiled with quiet gratitude, remembering that true strength is always gentle,